Jesus Christ specifically says that he will build his church on the rock of Peter. He gives Peter the keys. And again, you keep saying, oh, well, this, Paul was able to advocate, and there's this, it's not deriving from just Peter. It's not deriving from just Rome. But the other apostles were there, and they were spreading the gospel as well. But it was specifically said, I don't know how you can continue to discount the fact that Jesus Christ said, I will found my church on you, on Peter. And he gave him the keys. And he even says in Revelations that the chosen one has the keys. I mean, this goes back to David. And
the one who,
say,
hold on.
Go ahead.
The one who has
wait. Actually,
okay.
Can I finish? Because I'll let you go on a little bit.
Sure.
And also people might say, oh, well, he was referring to the local church. When he talked about the building the church on the rock, which was Peter, people say, oh, maybe this was the local church. This was the church of Jerusalem, which of course can't be true because James was the head of the church of Jerusalem. So when Jesus Christ said, I'm building my church on the rock, which is Peter, and Peter's name, of course, is a pun for the rock. I mean, this is clearly, I think it's hard to deny that Jesus is saying that would be the church. And you could go into Acts as well. Where Peter is the first one to perform a miracle in the church age. He was the first one to preach the gospel in the church age. He was the first one to refute heresy. He was the first man to raise a man from the dead. He exercised his power to bind and loose by allowing Gentiles into the church. And even though the other apostles, they initially were reluctant to accept this, they eventually did. Peter is the dominant personality out of all the apostles. He's spoken of 191 times. All the other apostles combined 130 times. And to get to the early church age, you say, oh, well, this was not how it went. It was not Vatican I, so to speak. But you can go to many church fathers in the days of the early church who all confirm this. There's actually not a single testimony in the days of the early church from the church fathers which denies the primacy of Rome. I mean, you could go to Patriarch Saint Menace of Constantinople, who said, we follow and obey the apostolic throne. We are in communion with those with whom it is in communion, and we condemn those with whom it condemns. You could go to Metropolitan Sergius of Cyprus, who says, O holy head, Christ our God hath destined by apostolic see to be an immovable foundation and a pillar of the faith. For thou art, as the divine word truly saith, Peter, and on thee as a foundation stone have the pillars of the church been fixed. And there are you could go for hours citing the early church fathers who affirmed the primacy of Rome, but you cannot find a single one who rejects it. So again, okay. I think there's a lot of evidence that's being left out here.
Okay, so I'm familiar with the kind of throwing out machine gun katina approach of quotations. I used to do the same thing. The first thing is in regard to Peter, actually many of the church fathers do debate the meaning of Matthew 16. So they don't all say that it was specifically Peter, and I don't have a problem with it being a pun on his name, because any of these arguments is 100% night and day removed from the arguments made, for example, in the Galatian or the papal decretals. So if you're familiar with this is a later concoction that was all about the temporal power and supremacy of the Roman bishop over all monarchs in the world, so forth and so on. This eventually led to unum sanctum, the medieval no salvation outside the church dogmatic decree. So none of this is anywhere closely connected to universal temporal supremacy of a single bishop. Now, everything that you've said about Peter is true of all the apostles. Now, again, being the mouthpiece of the apostles is not a universal supremacy. That's two totally different things, right? So, for example, Jesus at the end of John breathes on all the apostles, and he says, whoever sins you remit, they are remitted. Whoever sins you retain, they're retained. The very thing that he said to Peter, he gave to all of them. He didn't tell Peter, breathe your breath on them because it comes from me to you to them. He breathed directly on all of them. And Peter absolutely is the leader of the apostles in the early church. And since he's the one that you're saying, he established the church in Antioch. I agree that he set up the apostolic see. Does Antioch have Petrine papal supremacy? No. But Peter established it. So in other words, why is it the assumption? Oh, well, the assumption is that, well, Peter died in Rome And so he must have then given it a mystical super supremacy. And for many, many, many centuries after the early church, do you know what was used to back this up?
What?
It was the papal decretals. And the papal decretals are universally admitted to be forgeries. The Vatican admits they are forgeries. They're not real, because they obviously, the church in the 1st and 2nd century was not writing about the Roman bishop having temporal supremacy. That's preposterous, because they were still being persecuted by the millions by the Roman emperors. By the way, Jesus is the one who holds the keys to death and hell in the apocalypse, not Peter. It's
okay,
the one who descended into hell, the one who descended into hell, the harrowing of hell. That is our feast day, right? The harrowing of hell, the descent and the ascent. That's who has the keys to death and Hades. Jesus, not Peter.
He says, the words of the Holy One, who has the keys of David, who opens and no one shall shut, who shuts and no one opens. And he's referring, of course, to the royal keys he presented to Peter and Matthew. And you can say, oh, well, you know, he brings out all the apostles.
Everybody knows. This is, I've never heard this argument. This is new to me. So, but it's Jesus speaking to the 7 churches in every one of those letters. It's not Peter.
Okay, but then why did he give the keys to Peter? Why did he say that Peter is the rock on which he founds the church? I don't understand how you discount the importance here of Peter. Wait, are you arguing that, well, Peter he's the dominant personality, he gets the keys, he's the rock on which the church is built, but that is merely of a symbolic, like, first among equals head at the table?
I just said that he gave the same power of remitting sins to the entire group of the apostles. So look, 2 things.
But is this arbitrary that he's you know, he's always named first? It's the disciples and Peter. He gets the keys. Is that just simply an arbitrary distinction? I mean, what would be the purpose of that?
Peter is rewarded in Matthew 16 because it's the first time that anybody confesses that he's divine. So up until that time, throughout the Gospels, the apostles and even John the Baptist had been in doubt. They were like, "Is he a prophet? Is he? Who is he?" And then Peter is the first to make the divine confession. So it's not the man Peter. It is Peter and his confession, and it's deified Peter that is, you could say, a foundation stone of the church. When you read the Apocalypse, the New Jerusalem, it's a big new temple that's a big chunk block built on all of the names of the apostles. They're all there. Right. So it's not like there's only Peter and then all the other little apostles are stacked up on top of him like Cubert or something. It's a giant New Jerusalem temple with each foundation stone being the names of the apostles. So what is contained traditionally, this is across the board, Orthodox and Roman Catholics have always admitted that the promise of this text is 2 things. It's jurisdiction and it's spiritual. It's like a bishop having jurisdiction, and it's the ability to remit and retain sins. That's the office of the keys. This is what bishops have always done, and priests or presbyters as their helpers. So the East and West agree on that. Now, all I'm saying is that Jesus says the exact same thing to all of the apostles. He says in the Gospels, he says that when I enter into my kingdom, he says, you will all sit on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And that's always been interpreted as the authority of the apostles to judge the various churches. And again, we don't deny that there is, as the East has always said, the coryphaeus of the apostles, the mouthpiece of the apostles. And that's fine. And that's why many of the quotes that you're referring to, for example, if there is a controversy in the church, and a lot of those controversies were in the East. There were a lot of heresies in the East. Nestorius was the patriarch of Constantinople. That you would have Eastern bishops that were correct believing would appeal to Rome. Okay, but appealing to Rome is not being they're not appealing to Rome just on the basis of the fact that that's because Peter was there one time. It's because the confession of Rome was always Orthodox throughout those centuries, except for the period there's a little bit of hairy area during the Arian crisis where one of the popes is forced to sign an Arian confession, but nobody accuses him of being an Arian just because he was forced to do it. But the point is simply that the power of jurisdiction and remitting sins throughout the rest of the Gospels is given to the whole corpus of the apostles. It's not just to Peter or it's not Jesus giving it to Peter, who then gives it to them. It's Jesus giving it to all of them, breathing on all of them, and then they go out as a body. So, and this is reflected in the early church makeup of in the ancient world. What were the primary sees or Pentarchy, right? This is not the basis of Orthodox theology. We don't believe that you have to follow like 5 historic sees, like they're little bitty popes or something. It's just that these are the big cities where it was prominent to have the bishopric of Rome, the bishopric of Alexandria, right? These are just prominent cities. That's all it means. And by the way, Orthodoxy still retains that. The Pope, the Patriarch of Constantinople, he has absolutely no authority or jurisdiction outside of Turkey. He can't tell the Patriarch of Moscow what to do. The Patriarch of Moscow can't tell bishops in the countryside of Russia what to do. That's because we believe Jesus intentionally wanted to set up a decentralized system, and it's decentralized just like it was in the Old Testament. You had the synagogue system going out and setting up synagogues in the world. There was one high priest. He was in Jerusalem. We would say that high priest is Jesus. We don't need, because of the coming of the Holy Spirit, we don't need the giant jurisdictional monarchy of Rome.
Again, I just think it is a lot of, I think what's happening here is a lot of rationalization, because you have here, I mean, right in front of you in the scripture, giving the keys and building on the rock. These are very striking symbols. These are very significant symbols. And Peter, the dominance of his personality throughout the New Testament, and how he is first in everything, how he's referenced separate from the other disciples. When the angel comes to, but when Mary comes to Mary Magdalene, he says, go tell the disciples and Peter. He's always, in every instance when the apostles are listed, he's always listed first. And you chalk this up to, well, this is simply a mouthpiece. I don't know. I mean, you can, and you do draw out a lot of the Latin phrases, and you throw out a lot of these, these little events and this and that. But I think it is fundamentally a distraction from what is in Matthew. It's fundamentally a distraction from the fact you say, oh, well, he breathed on everyone, and well, that's interpreted as they will all sit and judge the churches. But Peter was given the keys. Peter was the rock on which the church was built. Jesus Christ said, I pray for your faith, and you are supposed to fortify the faith of the others. Okay. And I mean, do you just ignore this? Do you acknowledge?
No, I addressed every one of those points. And first and foremost, you said that he's always in charge and always first. No, he's not. No.
I said he's always listed first. I said he's always listed first when the apostles are listed. That's what I said. A minute ago,
you said he's always first. He's always in charge.
He's always lit. I didn't say he's always. No. I did not say he's always in charge of everything. I said he's always listed first, and I said he was given the keys, and he was the rock on which the church was built.
He doesn't preside at the council in Jerusalem.
Okay, but how do you interpret Jesus Christ says you are the rock on which the church is built? He was speaking to all the. He was speaking to all the apostles in a corporate way when he said that. When he gave the keys to Peter, he was giving it to all of them.
So I addressed this a minute ago. I said, first of all, there is debate amongst the church fathers as to what that text means. And what I said to you was that it doesn't matter if it's Peter himself, and that we don't have a problem with that, but it's not Peter himself. Huh?
I think it kind of does matter, I think, right? I mean, if Peter is,
because my point was that is arbitrary. That is infinite miles away from universal temporal jurisdiction over all princes in the world. That is crazy talk, dude.
If he's given the keys by Jesus Christ, then that's a far cry from that he has supremacy among the other patriarchs and bishops.
No. I don't think you understand the extent of the claims of the papacy. The papacy, after the rise of the papal states and after the early centuries, after the false papal decretals, literally claimed that the Bishop of Rome had universal supremacy, not just over spiritual issues in the church, but over all princes. That's why there is a new emperor anointed in 800 called Charlemagne, because they didn't want an Orthodox emperor in the East. They wanted to go their own way. And by the way, this is the time period when things change in the church. There's no more icons. There's only statuary. There's no more paedo communion. You see, the early church universally gave children, babies, communion. Now, isn't it interesting that Rome stops doing this? Literally, at the period when the Filioque enters, when we have a new emperor in the West, Charlemagne, all of these distinctions, when we already had a God-ordained emperor in the East. The fact that there's a God-ordained emperor in the East that's recognized for all of these ecumenical councils, who calls the councils, not the Pope, shows that Peter doesn't have universal temporal jurisdiction. So I don't have a problem with confining and debating the meanings of Matthew 16 to the church and to what it meant to the first century church. That's what the church fathers do. Mm-hmm. Some of them say it's Peter. Some of them say it's his confession. Some of them say it's this or that. But what I said to you in response specifically was that all of the things that you claimed were special to Peter are also given to the other apostles directly by Jesus. He gives them the power to remit sins. He says they will sit on the thrones judging the church.
But they don't get the keys. But they don't get the keys.
That's the meaning of keys. That's what I was telling you a minute ago, that everybody, Rome, East and West, always admits. What does that mean? It's not keys to death and hell that Jesus has. It's the keys to have jurisdiction and to remit and retain sins.
Well, it has precedent in Isaiah. It has precedent in Isaiah when the keys were used as a symbol of the king giving authority to the prime minister. Yeah. And so, yeah. And so there
That's
it is.
Jesus. That's Jesus.
Yeah. Jesus is the king and the prime minister is Peter. That's why he gives the keys to Peter. Peter is given the authority as the prime minister.
If that's the case, then what happens is, and this happened in the history of the church, then local bishops are eventually viewed as lacking something, right? So in other words, you can be at a church in Ephesus or whatever, and you can have the Eucharist, but it's not the Church of Rome where Peter was. And so therefore what you eventually get, and this is in Unum Sanctum, the papal decree actually says that Peter and the Petrine office, because of this prime minister view, it actually has a superior special super union with Jesus beyond what any of the other bishops say. Now, there is a famous argument and dialogue that Pope St. Gregory the Great has with a person who was claiming something very similar. These are in his letters, and he rebukes this as the claim of Antichrist, right? Because they were claiming to have sole jurisdiction over all of the churches, right? And negating the real jurisdiction that other bishops had. So what I'm saying is that this has played itself out in church history, and even a great pope like Pope St. Gregory the Great rebuked the idea in his letters, very well known. And I'm not making the Protestant argument that this means that there's no such thing as bishops. The Protestants go crazy with this. It's a dumb argument, but it does prove the point that obviously Pope St. Gregory the Great didn't, Gregory the Dialogist, that he's called in the East, he didn't view this as temporal supremacy over all princes and so forth. That's crazy.
So then why are you trying to force me to defend that as temporal supremacy then? If the great Pope says it's not temporal supremacy, then why are you, do you understand where I'm coming from? If the Catholic great Pope
Roman Catholic theology eventually dogmatized that it is.
That it is temporal, or that it is not
Absolutely.
Temporal? Okay. Well, again, I don't understand how you can look at the keys being given and and again, going back to Matthew with the keys, that just bears no significance for you. What did the keys represent, if not jurisdiction as the prime minister over the church? As
I just gave you, I just told you twice what it meant.
Oh, well, what is it?
Okay.
There's a lot in there. Every time you give me an answer, we go all over the place. So can you tell me in a very direct way?
Yeah, very direct. Okay, so historically,
right,
both East and West, as far as I'm aware, and all the church fathers here, I've never seen this disputed. You have the discussion of what jurisdiction or the keys is.
Right.
This gets heavily debated in later medieval Catholic theology, where they debate exactly whether or not you can attend a schismatic mass, whether or not you can attend a bishop's church who has no jurisdiction. And so the loss of keys means loss of jurisdiction. This all gets debated in Roman Catholic canon law. So what I'm saying is that there's not really a whole lot of debate as to what exactly having the office of the keys means. And as far as I'm aware, it's always explained to be the power of jurisdiction over your area, and the power to remit and retain sins. And then, of course, the power to perform sacraments later will be added onto that. And throughout the book of Acts, that when the apostles and so forth go out and they do chrismations. Now, so as far as I'm aware, that's always been what's conceived of as the meaning of keys. It's usually described or referred to in terms of jurisdiction. So absolutely, I never denied that Peter was given the keys. No Orthodox person has ever denied that.
I didn't say you did. I didn't say you denied it. I think you deny or maybe deflect from the significance of that.
No. See, what you're doing is that you're reading into this. This is what every Roman Catholic apologist does. That he reads into this.
Interesting.
All of the Roman Catholic, like all of these.
Well, you're a Roman Catholic apologist, right?
Yeah, for 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Is this what I mean? What I'm having trouble being convinced that Peter is the dominant force in the New Testament. I've been saying this over and over, and I ask for this direct answer, and you tell me, oh, well, people kind of agree that it actually just means jurisdiction over your area, which I don't even believe that, because there are so many examples here in the days of the early church where the Bishop of Rome, where the church in Rome is deferred to when it shouldn't have been. When, if what you're saying is true, it should have not been the case. Like I said in the example with the schism in Corinth, where if it was just all the apostles have jurisdiction, why didn't they go to St. John, who was closer to Corinth than Rome was, than the Bishop of Rome? But they deferred to him anyway. In the 2nd century, Pope Victor I excommunicated a number of Eastern churches, and nobody even doubted his authority to do that. Why was the Bishop of Rome able to threaten to excommunicate all these different Eastern churches unless they ceased their heresies? And nobody even questioned his authority to do that. There was, in the 3rd century, the Pope who wrote to Patriarch Dionysius of Alexandria demanding an explanation of reports from other Egyptian bishops that Arianism was spreading in his church. I mean, there are so many examples of this in the 3rd century, in the 2nd century, in the 4th century, where people defer to the Church of Rome, and you're trying to make it out like, oh, actually people interpreted it this way, and really it wasn't that. I think the historical case is against you, and I also think you're ignoring the significance of the fact that Jesus Christ, he breathed on the other apostles, but he prayed for Peter's faith. He gave the keys to Peter. He built the church on the rock that is Peter. And you're trying to say, well,
Peter's faith because Peter denied him 3 times. That's why he confirmed it 3 times.
Right. Okay. But he confirmed it 3 times for Peter, and you are trying to say that. Okay,
but where do you get from this?
3 times. Yeah. Go ahead.
Where do you get from this to infallibility and universal temporal supremacy? Like how none of these texts, nobody in their right mind could go from that to that. And that's what became Roman Catholic dogma. And I'm saying that shows that something is way off here. This is not right. And it's not just, let me go back to the church fathers and find this quote and that quote, this quote about how important Peter was. Nobody denies the importance of Peter. What's denied is universal supremacy. And there's no argument for that. And if you go to the church fathers appealing to Rome, it's absolutely, you can absolutely appeal to preeminent bishoprics when they're Orthodox. The same thing happens throughout the church. You will have appeals to the Pope of Alexandria called St. Athanasius. He was the Pope. That's a title of big metropolitan bishoprics or sees. The Pope in Alexandria, St. Athanasius, condemned powerfully all of these heresies. The book of the Apocalypse is only in the Bible because St. Athanasius convinced people in Rome that it should be in the Bible.
Well, he convinced, but he convinced people in Rome. And but was it people outside of Rome who put it in the Bible, or is it people who convinced the people in Rome to put it in, and the people in Rome put it in the Bible? You have it this weird way.
You're not listening. You're not listening. So so there were a lot of churches that already use this.
Right.
And nobody denies that there is a primacy, a kind of honor given to old Rome. That's in all
honor. I don't think it. I think it's true. Again,
it's not.
If you're trying to compare,
why would there be ecumenical councils? All you have to do is appeal
because
to the Pope.
they use it as a device. They use it. It doesn't say that.
Why would you even do that?
Well, because that is one of the temporal ways that the Pope would have his decision on these matters be spread and be decided on it. An ecumenical council, you have to look at it in terms of it pragmatically, not as though the ecumenical council.
Well, you were arguing a minute ago that the best pragmatic way was to just listen to what Clement said to Corinth.
No, I said that was an example. No. I said that was an example of when people deferred to the Pope. But sometimes a Pope, the ecumenical council is useful for the Pope to have bishops come and they discuss. But in every case, in every ecumenical council, the Pope had already made the decision before the ecumenical council, and after the ecumenical council, the Pope was the one who interpreted it and executed it. But again, to the existence of councils,
the popes did not call any councils. No Pope called a council.
Yeah, no, but they said, okay, you're getting into technicalities here. But the point being,
well, who called Vatican I?
Well, of course, it's not the Pope, it's the Emperor, but it's the Pope that signs on to it.
Who called Vatican
technicalities? Who?
That's not a technicality. That's a completely
it is a technical. Who called it?
The Pope.
Okay, but again, you're going back to
a technicality. This technicality shows that universal temporal supremacy is not true.
No, wrong. Because again, you're trying to say that the mere existence of a council is proof that the council is what determines what is true and what is not true.
No, I'm saying that's not the argument. The argument is that ecumenical councils shows that the Vatican I view of the papacy is not true. And that's why Ratzinger says that the first millennium of the church didn't have the papal monarchy view of Vatican I.
But then why is it that nobody questioned the authority of the Pope to intercede in every one of these affairs whenever there was some kind of a schismatic
I just gave you examples of rejections.
No, you didn't give me examples of rejections. You gave me examples where people persuaded the Pope to exercise their jurisdiction over the other churches.
I gave you an example of St. Athanasius convincing Rome
convincing them. Yeah, to put the book in the Bible. But ultimately, who executed that needed to be persuaded.
Nick, there were already churches for hundreds of years that had been using different canons. Okay, so I'm not saying that because St. Athanasius convinced Rome to convince Rome to put the Apocalypse in the canon, that's why the whole world has the Apocalypse. There were already churches using the Apocalypse.
Okay, but I think
I'm saying, no, you're not listening. You're not listening. What I'm saying is that there was a superior theologian named St. Athanasius, who was the Pope of Alexandria. The bishops of Alexandria are still called that. And he showed the Roman bishop where he was incorrect because they were going to, in their jurisdiction, remove the Apocalypse.
Okay, but again, I think the language betrays the fact that the bishop in Alexandria was not the executor of who put what in the Bible. He had to persuade. It's a very different thing. No. It's a very different thing. Hey, I'll let you finish. It's a very different thing to say. It's a very different thing to say that people came to the Bishop of Rome in many instances, whether it was a schism in Corinth, whether it was a bishop who was not vacating the episcopal residence, whether it was in the instance where, who was it? Let me pull it up here. In one instance where two Eastern councils evicted somebody and the Pope reestablished it. I mean, there are so many instances where the churches at the time, in the early days of the church, deferred to the ruling of Rome, deferred to Rome giving authority, having jurisdiction, than to say that somebody in Alexandria persuaded a bishop in Rome to put something in the Bible. Those are very different things.
You're not listening.
I think I am.
No, you're not. I've already explained to you that I'm not saying that there wasn't in the West, in old Rome, honor.
No. But honor is a very different thing than deference. Honor is a very different thing.
Honor is a very different thing than universal temporal supremacy.
Right. Okay. But what are you executing? Are you executing honor? Are you executing honor when people defer to your bishop, to the successor of Peter, over a living apostle? Is that honor, or is that primacy?
Nick, our bishops are successors of Peter. He established the church in Antioch. Everyone knows this.
Okay, yeah, but then he established the church in Rome. Why did they go to? What? Okay, but why did they go to Rome and not Antioch?
They did go to Antioch. So what I'm trying to explain to you is that listen, the way that the early church functioned was that it had a pentarchy.
There were heretics in the Pentarchy, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay,
and guess
then
what?
how can that function? Then how can that function? How can that be the church over which the gates of hell cannot prevail if you have heretics in the Pentarchy?
That is a preposterous argument, because because our view of the church is not that you have to follow these 5 bishoprics. In fact, at one point, the Arian crisis, there were only a handful of bishops that were still Orthodox. So Athanasius, for example. So listen, any one of these, or all 5 of those patriarchates could fall into heresy, and we know this because throughout the history of the church, every one of them at some point did, and even Rome was accused of heresy at the 6th Council.
Accused,
and that's an ecumenical council.
Accused, but were they ever heretics?
It doesn't matter, because the mind
matters. It so matters.
Listen, the mind of the church at that ecumenical council was not that this guy could never fail.
And, but again, the church is a very different thing being accused of a heresy than committing a heresy. If you are appealing, if you are appealing to the Pentarchy, if you are appealing,
dude, you don't understand. I'm not appealing to Pentarchy.
Then why'd you bring it up?
I'm explaining a fact of how the early church operated.
Okay, but it did not operate in this way. People did not appeal to these different churches the way that they did with Rome. They deferred to Rome.
Have you read the apostolic canons? Everybody in their jurisdiction appeals to their bishop. That's a no-brainer.
When it comes to a schism, when it comes to a heresy, when it comes to somebody who needs to be evicted, when it comes to somebody who's been wrongly evicted, in each of these cases, each
of these cases. This happened constantly. You think that the whole world, this is so stupid. You think that the whole world literally appealed to Rome in every case?
Well, no, I think in the case of Clement, they appealed to the Bishop of Rome.
They didn't appeal to him.
Why did they appeal? Okay, but why did they not go to a living apostle, to John the Apostle himself?
Okay,
why did they go to Rome?
This is a terrible argument. First of all, we don't know exactly the date of John's death.
I mean, okay, well, disprove it. Don't tell me it's a terrible argument. Disprove it.
John was on the island of Patmos. Do you even know what you're talking about?
Which at the time in 96 AD, he was closer to Corinth than was the Bishop of Rome.
Exiled to an island.
Look, even if it's not the Apostle John, why didn't they go to the Patriarch of Alexandria then? If it was the Pentarch system, why didn't they go to the Patriarch of Alexandria?
Nick, everybody admits that there's a Pentarchy. I'm not saying, I already said in the first hour, that's not a Roman Catholic version in Orthodoxy. Like, we don't appeal to these 5 people.
Okay.
I'm just saying.
But then why was it Rome? Why was it Rome and not Alexandria?
Listen to me.
I've been listening.
Okay. Anybody in the church, I already explained this with St. Maximus the Confessor, could appeal to different sees. Okay. So let's say you were in an Arian area in St. Athanasius's time. Okay. You might, if your bishop was Arian, you might appeal to either Rome because you knew that Rome was Orthodox, not just because it was Rome, but you knew it was Orthodox, and it also had Rome as the honor of old Rome. Or you might appeal to Alexandria, to St. Athanasius, because you knew that those 2 places did not teach Arianism. So the appeal is not based on juridical authority. The appeal is based on correct doctrine. You know that they're not Arian. So I'm saying is it
was arbitrary. That you're saying it's because they were.
I just said it was based on correct doctrine. That's not arbitrary.
Right. Well, but I mean, in terms of which church that was correct on doctrine, it's
what you would listen.
Correct. It's arbitrary that they chose Rome, right?
No.
Then why did they choose Rome? If there are multiple churches that are not Arian, why did they go to Rome? Why did they? It was an arbitrary choice. Once they figured out, okay, Rome is correct on doctrine, and let's say this other church is correct on doctrine. that they chose Rome over that other church that was correct on doctrine. You're saying, well, they went to Rome, and any other church which is correct on doctrine because it's correct. But why did they? You're saying after you've decided it's correct, then why Rome? Then it's just an arbitrary, well, they're all correct. These ones are correct. Let's pick that one.
No, I didn't say it was arbitrary.
Why Rome? Because of honor.
Will you let me talk?
Okay, go ahead.
The Pentarchy system is not arbitrary. It arose precisely because I'm trying to explain it to you what the Pentarchy system is. Okay. Go ahead. It arose in the first 4 centuries because of prominent cities. And there might be different reasons why those cities were prominent. So Alexandria at this time was prominent because of it being Egypt, because of it being having a large library, rumors of that large library, right? It was a big metropolitan area. And so these kinds of churches would gain a lot of power. They would gain a lot of status over time. And that's why, for example, when Constantinople was built, it became New Rome. Now, I'm not saying that the patriarchal Constantinople is our version of a pope. I'm not saying that the Pentarchy system is 5 little popes. I'm not saying that. All I'm telling you is an observation of how the early church arose, and this is not debated. Okay, so when there's a large heresy that spreads, and this happens many times, and it could spread in the East or the West. If you were in an area where you didn't have access to a correct believing bishop, you would probably appeal to any places that were prominent and that had a lot of prestige and that had a reputation for orthodoxy. And that would be Old Rome. It might be Alexandria. It might be Antioch. It might be any of these places. And that's what you see in the councils. The councils will list Old Rome, New Rome, and they will give new titles to people. This is how the Pentarchy system developed. It's from the ecumenical councils. They give titles. They gave Alexandria the title of Pope because it achieved a level of honor. Nobody believed that any of those places had the ability to tell the entire church what they had to do. And the fact, I've given you probably 20 examples that shows that that's the case. So what you've done is give me a bunch of examples where people appealed to an Orthodox Pope when they were persecuted by heretics. And I've already admitted that in the first hour.
Not people, churches. And here's an example. Let me ask you about this example and tell me what you think about this. I don't know if you're familiar with this one, but in the 3rd century, Paul of Samosata, a bishop of Antioch, he rejected the personhood of the Logos. That was condemned by 3 synods that consisted of the bishops of Syria, Palestine, and Asia Minor. And who was named as a replacement for Paul after he refused to stop preaching this heresy? He was evicted, he was excommunicated, but he refused to vacate the episcopal residence. Dominus was named as his replacement, but of course, Paul, he didn't leave his residence. Now, the emperor could have easily installed Dominus if what you're saying is true about the Pentarchy, and a church that is not false could have intervened in this case. Instead of the bishop of Syria, instead of the bishop of Palestine, instead of the bishop of Asia Minor, all 3 together, or the emperor, who did they appeal to? Who did the emperor go to ask who should be the next patriarch? They went to the bishop of Rome, and the bishop of Rome installed Dominus as the patriarch. So why is it then if actually the emperor has the authority, or actually every pope that is preaching good doctrine are appealed to in the age of the early church, why was it in this instance that they went to Rome?
Well, this just illustrates a very basic misunderstanding of Orthodox theology. No emperor has authority in the church, and no emperor makes the decision to remove bishops. Now, many emperors persecuted the church, and even like iconoclast emperors persecuted Christians, but they were later defeated, and Orthodoxy triumphed in 787 at the Seventh Council, for example. So no emperor has the say-so in the spiritual jurisdiction. We agree that there is a kind of a temporal and a spiritual realms. They're not strictly divided. There's not 2 different bodies of Christ like medieval Roman Catholic theologians would say. There's only one body of Christ.
Nice snipe there, but go ahead.
There's only one body of Christ. And so in other words, a decentralized system that will appeal to patriarchates that had primacy is something that we still see today in Orthodoxy. So, for example, if somebody in Russia,
you're not answering the question.
I am answering the question. I'm saying that this is a praxis that has always existed and still exists in Orthodoxy.
Yeah, they always defer to Rome, then, right? That's the demonstrated in this example.
Did the Sixth Council defer to Rome when they condemned the Pope?
No, but we're not talking about. We're talking about this specific.
You said
example.
They always defer to Rome. They don't always defer to Rome.
No. We're talking in this example. Why did the Bishop of Syria? Why did none of these people? Why were they not able to do it, but they had to go to Rome?
Okay, I said a minute ago, during the Arian crisis, a large portion of the empire.
Okay, but why? Okay, but Syria and Palestine and Asia Minor all recognized that this was a heresy. They were the ones that excommunicated Paul Samosata. So why did they not? Why did they not replace him? Why did they not have all three of them? They were the ones that excommunicated the guy. Why were they not the ones to replace him? Why were they not the ones to go in there? If you're saying, oh, well, it's any church, why did they have to go to Rome to name the successor and to install him?
Because I already told you that nobody denies the
place of honor. The place of honor. That's a stretch, Jay. The place of honor.
That's the wording of the councils for the old Rome.
No, but to say that that's simply a place of honor instead of jurisdiction, I think is a pretty generous interpretation of honor. I mean, that's jurisdiction. If there's deference.
That's why I can explain things like the council condemning the Pope, and you can't.
Well, I'm not familiar with that particular example, but in this example, you cannot explain. That's not very nice, but in this particular example, I fail to see how this is merely. You seem to chalk everything up here where people defer to Rome, where churches go out of their way to send their rulings on this to Rome, where they go out of their way to clear things with Rome, where Rome intervenes in the schisms, where Jesus Christ gives his keys to Peter, he builds the church on Peter, and in every instance it's, oh well, that's a place of honor. Oh well, that's actually has a lot less significance. It seems to just be it's apologetics. It's a rationalization. It's a denial.
The wording that I use to you when I talk about the honor of old Rome, this is the wording of the councils. So when Nicaea, and then later when Ephesus, when Constantinople, and Constantinople too, when they talk about these bishoprics, that's their language. So it's not me deferring. It's not me making up. It's not
but you're saying that when Rome does this, they are acting in their capacity as in a place of honor instead of in their place as having jurisdiction. And I'm saying, to say that's the place of honor, I think that's jurisdiction. I think you're chalking that up to, because Rome does have a place of honor, but for the Catholics, they also have jurisdiction. And you're saying, well, in each of these cases, this is merely the capacity of Rome is having honor and not having jurisdiction, right?
Right. And again, I don't accept that. But if that's all that Roman Catholicism said, there might have never been a schism. But what happened is that Rome didn't stop at just saying, well, I can intervene and help in a conflict that's 2,000 miles away. It extended into a vast claim of the entire universe, that the Pope has total authority over all temporal and spiritual matters. There's no way to get from what Peter says to what Jesus says to Peter to the Pope being able to have a giant Rothschild run bank. I mean, that's just, how do we get from that to that?
How do we get from that to the Rothschild's bank thing? I think that's kind of a little bit of a distraction there. I mean, you're kind of getting away again from the point where
this is not theoretical. This is what happens in history. This is a real historical church.
Yeah, no, I think we could just as easily say that if Constantinople had the same honor, why did they bow to pressure from the Ottoman Turks and withdraw from the Council of Florence? I mean, we can throw a lot of things in there, I think.
But we have no problem saying that any of those Pentarchs, any of those patriarchs could fall into heresy. And in fact, I mean, Bartholomew seems to be heretical. He could easily be a heretic.
Don't you think though that that seems pretty? I mean that if the highest degree of authority in the church is just the patriarch, just the highest degree of authority is, you know, maybe the first among equals, which, you know, if there wasn't a schism would be Rome. Don't you think that's kind of weak? If they can all fall into heresy, don't you think that's kind of a weak argument that Jesus Christ would leave his church? And Jesus Christ specifically said that his church would never be taken over by the gates of hell. And yet you say that, oh, well, bishops are subject to heresy. And I guess you think that Rome is subject to heresy. How can that be? How can the gates of hell never triumph over the church if the highest degree of authority has been triumphed over several times in many cases?
This is a mistaken presupposition about how to hold together the body of the church, and then it must require a single imperial papal monarchy as the only means by which the church would hang together. And I'm saying, first of all, the fact that orthodoxy still exists, teaching the exact same thing that we've always taught, everything that St. Basil says, we say, everything that St. John Damascus says, we still say, and this is 1,000 years of not having communion with Rome. The fact that we still exist and we are still spreading, we are converting people, shows that we don't need what you're talking about to continue to exist.
Oh, you know that's flimsy. You know that's flimsy.
No, it's not, because we're talking about history.
Well, no, and here's why it's flimsy, because you're saying, oh, well, you know, our church isn't, our church is doing just fine. I mean, that's not really the arbiter of true or not. If there's a systemic problem that the highest
level. This is a constant argument that Roman Catholics make, that there's no way to continue with the unity of the church without the Bishop of Rome. And I'm saying
there's no way you could know that it's, there's no way that you could know that what you're saying is the truth if you don't have an infallibility, if you don't have a pope. If they could fall into heresy,
I already addressed this.
Who's to say that your patriarchs are not heretical? Who's to say that they will never not become all heretical?
Right. This is a basic epistemological misunderstanding that Roman Catholics have, where they move the problem back a step.
Charming.
Okay, Nick. So within Roman Catholicism, there are, within what is claimed to be, there's the SSPX, there's the FSSP, there are liberals like Hans Küng, there are the neoconservatives of Vatican II, there's the Sedevacantists. So all of these people claim that they have real Catholicism. So, and every one of them will say, we read the papal decrees correctly. So all you've done is move the problem back a step by saying that we have the Pope and that's how we know for sure. How do you as an individual know for sure that you are interpreting the Pope's decrees correctly? Because
we know from the priest. We know from the priest and the bishops and the cardinals, and they all proceed from the Pope. They all proceed from the, well, but the Pope's dogma is infallible, and the bishops and the cardinals are tasked with carrying it out. I mean, if you get down to it, outside of the, what? Why is this funny?
That's circular.
It's not.
I'm asking you how you know. You said you know from a fallible guy who's a priest because he got it from the Pope who's infallible.